Hey everybody, Red X Rain here. No, don't worry about checking your sound on the game. I know what I'm doing. No opening ditty on this one. Nothing, no 8-bit orchestral score here whatsoever. This is Star Wars. It's another one of those double colon games. Oh, that sounds terrible. Star Wars Return of the Jedi Ewok Adventure. Also for the Atari 2600. Alright, so, boy, where to begin with this game? So, there's a lot to be said about the controls of this game, from the player's perspective, but also from the sort of unusual history. So, this is, not that I'm some expert on Atari games, by any means, but there's definitely, this struck me as really unusual for the time. Space shooters were very, very popular, and there are even, a couple of Star Wars ones, makes sense. But this is the first game, or the only game I can think of where it has the controls. I'm sure there's like a official name for this, but like you can actually raise and lower the ship, so you can see there's a shadow underneath the ship that I'm flying, and so it does take altitude into effect in addition to moving left and right. And I'm so worried talking about that I'm not actually talking about what I'm doing here. So it is interesting that this kind of takes place in a pseudo 3D environment where you have to like be high enough to avoid the trees, but you also want to be low enough in other cases. So when this alarm goes off, which is one of the very few sounds in the game, it means you're approaching the Imperial base. Just like in the film, trying to take out not the base, but the shield, right? And I'm still not doing a very good job of this. So what I'm supposed to do is and I can't go backwards. I'm gonna have to just, this is the test run right here, if you can't tell. No, I was testing it out before. I'm just not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So what you're supposed to do in the first few levels of the game is get your ship low enough. As you can see, I can use the joystick to push down and up, and just get right sort of on top. There we go. So we can lay a bomb. And there you go. We just blew up the shield, and now, the Death Star can be blown up. And like most Atari games, it just repeats the same thing. It gets a little bit harder every time, how those older games are. There's a limited number of weapons you can use here. You can see at the bottom there's the one next to that, it looks like a diamond. Oh, come on, man. I guess I hit the tree. That or the Stormtrooper. Those are my lives. And then it has the, that number next to it, to the rocks, and that's my, ammunition. Whoop. It's not the best. I do think it's interesting that they give you a limited number of shots. Wow, that was really good. That's just this whole first playthrough. Just wasn't very good, was it? I barely got into level 2. So let's try that again. And I can talk about some of the other aspects here. This I did earlier, but I didn't really talk about it. So one of the cool things you can do in this is you can overtake other Imperial vehicles. Well, I mean, there's really just the speeders, which that was, and of course you've probably seen the walking ATSTs. It takes into consideration thought I would have that one. The altitude thing again. It's very, very important in this game. Of course, the speeders are a little bit lower, and I need to not be over here. Nope. You can see at the bottom there's also an arrow pointing to the right. That means that that's where the base is. I must have moved over to the screen to the left, so I got to get over there. But yeah, so the speeders are much lower. Still over here? Man, I went way far. Speeders are lower, so you want to be lower altitude, and basically you just kind of need to run into them, and then you'll take them over. The ATSTs are tougher. They're taller. You have to take that into consideration, I guess, but I can never really seem to overtake them very well. Now, the nice thing about getting either one of those, the ATSTs or the or as I said, I prefer the speeders, is that you don't have to like time your attack when you get to the shield generator. Oh, come on. You can just kind of run right into it. As long as you're in one of the ships, it just does the work for you. So that's definitely a big advantage. Plus, it makes you more or less invincible. It moves real fast, although the controls, if you couldn't tell, are very erratic. It's always constantly moving left or right, very, very fast. I thought I could get that one. Very, very fast, and you just kind of have to keep adjusting to that. You have to either be pushing left or right to keep it somewhat centered, and the fire button is still the fire button. So yeah, a lot of really interesting control schemes. For a modern gamer, it's not terrible. It's once you know what to do, it's not so bad. But this gets to sort of the more interesting, I think. I'm not even gonna try to get those ATSTs. It's just not worth it. Yeah, the interesting history that this game has. So I wasn't quite sure when I wanted to play this game. I thought it would make sense. Oh, by the way, of course, you can multiple players and you can change difficulties different times, if you want. So now I'm playing on a harder difficulty. But yeah, so I wasn't sure exactly. I knew I was going to play this game, so I'm playing every game. But I wasn't sure when I was going to play this one because this game technically, well, no, it was never officially released. There's sort of a story about how so there was only one prototype basically of this game made, and never got released. And then I think it was the developer, the designer of the game, gave his copy to his son to play. And then I guess the son eventually held on to it and then sold it, sort of, not like black market, but unofficially sold it to like a collector or something like that. And then eventually the ROM showed up on the internet. And so that's really the only way you can play it. So basically there's only one physical copy of this game, so they say, in the world. So it's a very, very rare game, and has a lot of, everyone always wants to see it kind of thing. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, it was developed, I thought initially, it makes sense that there are two Return to the Jedi games for the Atari 2600, because again, this came out in 1983, just like the other game that I had played two videos ago, the Death Star Battle game. But I think development for this one started first, because originally this game was called Revenge of the Jedi. Nope, no joke there. It was called Revenge of the Jedi. They didn't apparently even know what the movie was called. Good job, guys. Revenge of the Jedi Game 1. So that leads me to believe that development on this started before Death Star Battle, otherwise it'd be called Revenge of the Jedi Game 2, right? You'd think so, but again, if they didn't really think enough to even call it Return of the Jedi Game 1, maybe that's a little bit suspect. But there's that. So this game is that's kind of, if anything, that's more the reason that this game is popular in any sort of regard, not so much the gameplay and that kind of thing, but just the unusual history there about, it took over like 20 years for it to even, people had talked about it, but no one could ever really play it for 20 years until, again, the ROM got, put on the internet. And, it's really, playing it now, I was saying earlier, as a modern gamer, like, the controls aren't too bad. It's a little, it leaves something to be desired, but it's all right. The publishers at the time, who, by the way, was again Parker Brothers. So this was the fourth Parker Brothers Star Wars video game. They kind of had the market cornered on that. They were the go-to publishers for Star Wars games at this time. All the other games I've played so far, same thing. They didn't. Oh, I'm really surprised I didn't get that speeder. They didn't quite feel the same way. So the head programmer, developer of the game, Larry Gelberg, I think, did it. He had really lofty ambitions for this game. He wanted it to control differently than any other sort of game at the time, and especially space shooters. And that's one of the things I was saying was I thought this was really cool is that you can, it takes elevation into consideration. You can go up, you can go down, in addition to going left and right and that kind of thing. So really pretty progressive design in that regard. It's also actually pretty graphics intensive. I mean, it's a lot is really going on here on the screen with how the system needs to think about the controls, and the forest looks pretty good. It doesn't look bad. The enemies are moving. There's a lot that's going on. So they were never actually able to get any music put into the game. So very very small cartridges, very limited systems. They had to kind of pick their battles. So I'm glad they at least went with something that looks pretty good as opposed to, if you couldn't even tell what things were, then I'm glad they didn't sacrifice graphics for music, because it's unfortunate that there's no music, but I think you can kind of get around it, But yeah, so despite the sort of pseudo, some might disagree with me, progressive sort of ideas about the controls here, yeah, the publishers didn't really see it that way. They tried it out and they thought it was going to be way too hard for the average gamer. Oh, did I get that one? I felt like I crashed. Oh, I did crash. Okay. Yeah, that the average video game player wouldn't be able to figure it out, so they just kind of scrapped the project, and instead they went with, but again, they still published the other Return of the Jedi game, Death Star Battle, which, I don't know, in retrospect, I mean, it doesn't, this doesn't need to be a competition where I have to say one has to be better than the other, and again, maybe I'm looking at this from a different lens, now in 2015 than what they were thinking about video games in 1983. It was just a different market. It was a different industry, and so they had different sort of priorities. But with a little bit more practice, I think I could really come to like this game more perhaps than Death Star Battle. But I like Death Star Battle too. But that being said, I think that pretty much covers everything in this game. It's sort of one of those repeating loop games. There's stuff that shows up a little later, like you can pick up extra ammunition from like Ewoks that are on the ground. Same thing, you just gotta kind of fly low and touch them and they'll give you more stuff. But basically it's just a looping of, look for the shield generator base thing and blow it up. But yeah, so, I think I'm gonna wrap this video up here. So, as always, thanks for watching. Please like, please subscribe, please comment. I do always appreciate it. And this is a big turning point because now we're done with the Atari home console series of games. So I'm probably going to take a little break and then we'll sort of see what came sort of years after this. So until then, may the Force be with you.